Hello and welcome to The Reset, a mental health podcast without all the bollocks. I'm Sam Delaney. My guest this week is former West End star turned therapist and author Richard Tyler. After a shock cancer diagnosis interrupted his happy and successful life, Richard learnt to embrace life's lows as well as its ups, something that few of us are really prepared for. The book, As A Kite Falls, is a powerful male perspective on how to deal with the very worst that life can throw at you. It's inspirational stuff, and I really enjoyed talking to Richard about the lessons he's learned in the face of adversity. I hope you enjoy listening. Richard, welcome to The Reset.
Hey Sam, thanks. Good to be here.
It's a real pleasure to have you. Your new book, A Kite Falls, A Voyage Through Descent, is a very moving, beautifully written book. Tell us why you chose that title.
I used to have very vivid memories of climbing a big hill with my dad when I was 7, 8, 9 years old, and beautiful hill in the Buckinghamshire countryside called Coombe Hill. And we'd kind of trudge up there at least once a week, and we'd get to the top and I'd be carrying my kite and enormous excitement about my kite flying escapades. And we get to the top and I'd be my dad would be the thrower of the kite and I'd be the holder of the kite. And off we go into this kind of beautiful dance of him throwing, me running, trying to keep this kite up in the air. And there were just beautiful seconds, it's mostly seconds of bliss as this kite would kind of dance around. And then it would come crashing down. Without fail, it would come crashing down, generally sooner rather than later, and sooner than I would have liked. And what I guess I quickly learned was my dad would share in my momentary excitement of the kite flying, but then was completely unable to deal with the kite falling. This kite that was plummet, free fall, headlong into the ground. And yeah, our kite flying sessions would end. He'd come over, we do a debrief, and unfortunately I'd get to go home because he would have had enough at that point, because he couldn't bear the loss and the descent of the kite. And I remember him, he died about 11 years ago, and I remember throughout his life he was absolutely fixated on ascending, growing his own business, being a pillar of the community, being the type of person that people would like to have around, being helpful. He always wanted more, he wanted better, he wanted a better car, he wanted to earn more money, he wanted a nicer home, a nicer garden, he wanted all of those things. But was actually in some ways emotionally and psychologically crippled at a descent and free fall, and when his world around him would crash. And I therefore don't think I ever learned how to deal with descent in my life. And there I was, 49. I'd had quite a lot of what felt like fairly minor descents in my life. And then I was crushed with a life-altering cancer diagnosis that took the wind literally out of my sails. And I was told I would have 3 months to live if I didn't start treatment the next day. And when I sat down during my recovery, I needed to find a way to process and make some sense of what my own life had been like in freefall. And it was at this point I realized I had never been educated by my parents or my educational system as to how to deal with loss and descent and what happens when our world is actually shit and it feels out of our control. And I had no method of being able to work through it. So it felt fitting, really, as a tribute to my dad and to so much of what was brilliant about my childhood, to also acknowledge there was a big elephant in our family life, which was neither me nor my siblings nor my parents had a way of being able to deal with the difficulties when they come and find us.
How did when you were growing up, there must have been moments where
Mm.
one or all of you had failures, setbacks,
Mm.
challenges. How were they just not discussed? Were they ignored?
Yeah, they were ignored, Sam. Yeah, they were ignored. I think I talk in the book about my failing. I had 11 plus at that point in the region that we lived in. So I take your 11 plus exams, you go off to grammar school or you go off to the bog standard state school. And I failed. And I saw the disappointment on my parents' face, and it was never talked about. It was never talked about again. And it was swerved. It was ignored. It was buried. My dad would huff and puff, and you go out to the garden. If I ever had to be the bearer of some bad news, he'd huff and puff and complain and just do and go out and be with his roses, which was his sanctuary and his solitude. My mum would just be very heartbroken and upset for her own pain and her own loss, not my loss, but her own loss.
Mm.
And so it was just ignored. It was just, we just didn't talk about it. We kind of got on, and we got on and did what much of society does still, which is look for ways to ascend, look for ways to climb back up again as quickly as possible.
It's such a fascinating theme, and you've found such a interesting way of investigating it. Although obviously, the catalyst for it is very sad and has been a huge challenge with your diagnosis. But before we talk more about that, you say there about society. It does seem, I don't know whether it's peculiar to British society, but this sort of exhausting ambition that seems to sort of shape all of our lives. It means that I suppose we feel like we just have to cope or ignore or fight through bad times. And I get the feeling that what you've done is learn to embrace them and learn from them. Is that what this journey has been like?
I think I think it's been a part of it. And I think it's been, and a part of what struck me when I got the diagnosis was there's a big school of, I guess, cancer thought, which is this kind of fuck cancer attitude.
Mm.
And that never, and then there's not a right or a wrong. We have to go with what we feel pulled to that will most support us. And for me, that didn't work. Fuck cancer didn't work. But I will just remember the people that would go, it's terrible, but you got to look on the bright side. You got to look for the positives, and you got to look for the pluses. And you're really lucky. You've got a beautiful wife, and you've got a daughter, and you've got a home. And one person even said, you've had a good 49 years, and I kind of, do you know what I get? I get, and this is the story I tell myself, is that in order to be with the pain and difficulty of another, we have to be able to be with our own pain and difficulty. If we can't sit with our own trauma, whether it's big T or small t, or our own challenges and what they might mean for us, it's incredibly hard for us to sit in a very genuine way alongside someone else as they travel their own pain. And that's what I noticed. I noticed that there were people who stepped up and stepped into my world, and there were others who kind of told me that it would be all right and hoped for a bit more of a positive outcome. And then actually they stepped away because it was just too much for them to bear. So I think what became very clear was, and I talk at length in the book about, I spent much of my own life following the thread that society teaches us, which is more, bigger, better exam results, better qualifications, which means you can get a better job, which means you can earn more money, which means you can get a bigger house. And, I'm generalizing, but for the majority of us, that's what we're swimming around in. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm saying what we've lost is this ability to balance it out with, of course, chase what we want and chase our dreams and chase bigger and chase better, and at the same time, how are we able to sit with the times when the world around us crashes and we are plunged into darkness and the lights are switched off? It's a both and. It's not an either or. It's not one is good and one is bad. It's we're living in a time where we are in often moment to moment, day to day. We're being faced with ascent, opportunities to ascend, and we're being faced with descent. We're living through a polycrisis. We're living through. We don't need to look too far around the globe to see people suffering and being at the end of a war, at the end of a financial crisis, at the end of political health system infrastructure collapsing. There's enormous loss. We're still on the back of COVID. There is so much, I think, that we are all in all corners of the world attempting to deal with and navigate and make some sense of, and kind of actually reset ourselves and find what our new path is. And I think we have to be able to do that with a sense of ascent and up and increase and more and improvement, but not that in isolation. We have to be able to hold the descent, because within the descent, and maybe we'll talk about this a bit more at some point, there is enormous wisdom. Enormous wisdom to be mined for.
It's 3 years since your diagnosis, right? Or maybe a bit less.
Yeah, a bit less, yeah.
Like two and a half. What was the journey like for you to make these discoveries? Because presumably in the early weeks it was just pure shock.
Yeah. It was, most of it was harrowing. I have to say. I was always the person I was never going to get cancer. My dad passed away with cancer, and that was the first very noticeable front and center person in my world who had cancer and passed away from it. And I was always the person that I was never going to get cancer. I was an avid fan of Stand Up to Cancer. I'd watch all the programs that run in conjunction with it, and I would sit there and I would sob my heart out at the families and their tales of living with cancer. And there was always a part of me that was very resolute, and that won't be me. That's other people's families. That's not my family. So this enormously crushing diagnosis, that I knew there was something not quite right, and I knew I was going to get a diagnosis of something, but what had been pointed towards was some kind of, described as lazy lymphoma, which might mean a watch and wait scenario. I wasn't expecting stage 4B, aggressive, rare cancer that needed to begin immediate treatment. So the journey was harrowing, and there are plenty of days, Sam, where the journey still feels harrowing. I'm reminded that I have this incurable cancer, and it, people see me now and go, "You look so well, you look so great, you look better than you did before, and you got your hair back," and I do have my hair back, and I do much of the time feel okay, and I am reminded, often daily, sometimes multiple times, that this is incurable. I will always be under the care of an oncology team. There is a high propensity that the cancer returns. That's its normal way for mantle cell lymphoma, that it comes back. So those early weeks, as you say, were shock. Was kind of mute. I didn't really say anything. I didn't want to speak to people. I had no vehicle for knowing how to deal with the fact that I had to tell a then 17-year-old daughter that her dad had cancer. I didn't have a language for that. I didn't have a way to sit down and tell the person that I love enormously that I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what's going to happen in these coming weeks and months. And so my first 3 months of treatment were horrendous. They were intense chemo cycles, 3 days at a time, inpatient. I did hit a rock bottom and I think it was the morning I woke up. I needed to go into hospital. I had another cycle starting. I had tablets to take, probably 20, 25 tablets to take. And I remember each one was so difficult for me to take because I felt so sick. And I'd take one at a time and there'd be a few minute gap in between. And Kelly sat on the side of the bed with me. Kelly's my wife. And I'm just like, I don't think I can go back today. I don't if someone had said, choose now, you can pass on to another quieter, gentler world, or you can stay with this. What do you want to do? I'd go, I'm out. Because I had nothing left. I felt like I had nothing left. And there was and I felt like I really sat with that. I felt like I sat with this. Is there an easy way out of this now? Do I have an easy way out? And I don't know what that would have been. But I sat with it, and I am very conscious that I have a daughter that I want to parent for as long as I can. I'm very fortunate to have an amazing wife. I felt like I had an incredible community of people cheering us on. And I just had a sense of this that my story isn't completely done. I felt like there was something to be able to, not just for my own wisdom to find, but to be able to share some of that wisdom. Makes it sound quite grand, I think. But it felt like there was some information that I had not been able to access within my life, and that only now was I starting to maybe grasp something, maybe be able to get hold of something quite tangible and think about how I bring it into my life. And I think that was a turning point when I knew there had to be another way. There had to be another way through. And I didn't know what that was, but I knew that there had to be another way through. And I did get my stuff together that day, and I did go into hospital, and it was every bit as horrific as I had expected it to be. And there was just a slither of me that believed the story wasn't quite done.
And was that thing, that information, was that meaning? Is that, do you think, what it was that you needed, and that you felt that you were now fully able to discover a sort of a hidden piece of meaning that you hadn't been aware of before?
I think so. I think that's what it is. I think there was a sense of there was some purpose to this. There has to be a reason. I'm not religious. I've never been religious. But something said to me that there was a reason that all of this had collided to meet at this point, my life, this journey, this family, this illness. And whilst I believe there is a cellular part of it, there is something biological, there is something systemic going on in my body. I also have some very strong narratives around illness. There is so much of our ill health and our chronic ill health that is emotional, psychological, spiritual in its nature, and is kind of designed to tap us on the shoulder, to arrest us, to grab our attention when we're not fucking well listening, and we navigate this world in some generally sleep-like state where we're seeking out familiarity, comfort, groove. If it's too difficult, we numb it in some way. And we are, most of us, many times in our life, tapped on the shoulder to pay attention. And I don't know who that is. I don't know if it's there's lots of ways of describing it. I don't know if it's our true essence, our true nature, our soul, our self, our divine, or who we are in our absolute spirit before we start building all these kind of aspects of personality on. But we are tapped on the shoulder to pay attention, and I have been tapped on the shoulder to pay attention, and for the first time, it felt like maybe I was open to listening. I'd been tapped in the years before, and I had listened. I'd listened up to a point. I thought I'd probably listened enough. And I quickly wanted to get back to what was familiar and comfortable and what felt like quite an effortless life in a way. And here I was being tapped. And so wisdom, meaning, purpose. And I've had this conversation with a lot of people in the last few years. We set a charity up a couple of weeks after I was diagnosed with people with blood cancer. I've had a lot of conversations. I've had a lot of conversations with people who have lived with a blood cancer and have passed away in these last 2 years. And I've talked with their partners and their families. And some people are open to an idea of that there is purpose and meaning and insight and information and understanding to be gleaned and mined for as a result of illness or as a result of any major descent in our lives. So some people aren't ready to hear that or ready to entertain the idea that there might be some truth in it.
But sorry, go on.
No, I was going to say, and I think it's because it's fucking hard. Because the moment we go, well, do you know what? What if there was some wisdom in this? What if this illness were wanting to teach me something? What if it were wanting to reveal something to me that up until now I have not seen? In order for us to hold that question, we have to be vulnerable. We expose ourselves. That means we have some agency in what happens next. It's much easier to go, oh, it's my body. It's my body. It's the cells. It's a disease. 1 in 2 people get it. I couldn't have done anything differently. There we go. I wait for the toxic chemicals to cure me. And that's it. And they don't want to play any part in their own healing and recovery. And that we all have to make the best choices we can in that moment, I think, with the information that we have available to us. And I just had a sense that there was some information that perhaps that I hadn't seen, I hadn't witnessed until that point.
It makes a lot of sense because I think people, like when we face any kind of rock bottom, as they call it in recovery, that's the catalyst for, well, you can either run or give in, or you can sort of open up your mind and your heart and think this is the best time possible. So whether it's a cancer diagnosis or any sort of huge rock bottom moment, I guess that's very often the moment where you're at a crossroads. Not everyone takes it, like you say.
Yeah.
I'm always interested to know, with people who've been through this and certainly those who've opened their mind in the way you have, is do you ever think much about yourself in the past before your diagnosis and the things that you used to get anxious about, get depressed about? Is that something that you reflect on a lot and you sort of compare it? And basically, do you ever chuckle at your old self now?
Oh, chuckle and cry.
Right.
And yearn for it as well. There's
of course, yeah.
It's enormous grief and loss and what I have had to give up. And I feel like I've given up a lot of things that were that were pivotal in my life and so important to me.
What
And
sort of things?
um, I guess there's some physical things. So that my physical strength well, I think we'll recover. We'll recover to more than it is at the moment. Um, but physically, I am nowhere near as fit and uh, with the same strength and stamina and resilience I used to have.
Mm.
So things that I would have done, which would have been non-stop days of working, going climbing with my daughter, walking the dog, cooking, just kind of active, busy life things where I would start early and finish late and be kind of like ride the waves. I'm not able to do that anymore. So things that are high intensity activity, I miss. I really miss it. I have I've got about 40% hearing loss in one ear and 60% hearing loss in the other ear due to
Wow.
cisplatin, which is one of the platinum-based chemo drugs. Which, when I had to sign my waiver on the day that they'd given me the diagnosis, and they said, there's a risk for hearing loss, there's a risk for peripheral neuropathy, which you might never get back feeling in your feet and toes. And I mean, you sign it because they've just
Mm.
told you you've got 3 months to live. So here I am with some hearing issues and tinnitus. My old life was as I trained as a classical singer and a musician, and I performed 8 shows a week in the West End for years. And London, I love, and I love theatre, and I love being out in London. And I can't deal with that anymore. I can't. I'm hypersensitive to sound, um, to stimulus around me, to sensation, being on tubes, temperature. My body just. I was quite a tough little kid. I was pretty resilient to temperature, resilient to sound. I'd be the kid out in the winter in shorts and a t-shirt. Now cold is unbearable to my bones. So I choose not to go to London anymore. I choose not to go to the theatre as much because I can't bear the assault on my senses. So, so things like that. And we go, well, it's not the end of the world. And of course it isn't the end of the world. And, I replace those things with some other things. And they were such an enormous part of who I was and what I stood for and what I derived great pleasure from. And that was a London thing. I kind of grew in stature in London. London felt like my patch. It's completely unbearable. If I have to go to London now, I get in and I get out as quickly as I can. So yeah, there are things I've needed to give up. I laugh at my life. I do laugh at some of the things I would have been anxious about and bothered about, and in some ways, some of those anxieties have been replaced by other anxieties,
Mm.
different anxieties, and I laugh at some of my habits. I laugh at some of my, I don't know if we want to call them rules or laws that I lived by or promises that I had made myself as a child about how life would be, about the way I'd move through life, the things I'd do, the things that mattered, the way I'd behave in certain situations. And there's so much bullshit we create in our little personalities as we grow up, and so many stories which are some are self-serving. Many of mine were about serving others, serving my mum, serving my family, being there for the welfare of others is what I solely believed. And here I was, as someone who loved showering others in love and kindness and compassion, seeking out, in some cases, begging, if not simply asking for help and support and kindness and compassion, and finding ways to, I need to actually learn to receive it and to absorb it and to allow it in some way. And that's not hard. It's not easy for me because it's not what not what is comfortable.
Mm. And do you mind my asking what you've from all the lessons you've learned and the wisdom that you've opened your mind to? What have you discussed with your daughter through this? If that's not too much of a private question, what have you has it been quite meaningful, the stuff that you've been passing on through this experience to her?
I wonder what she'll make of this if she listens to it. So, so my daughter's on the spectrum. So she's high functioning, super high functioning, super smart. And I would best describe it as her emotional voice at times is quite limited. So her ability to express what she is feeling, what she is making sense of, what she wants to have a dialogue about, can be quite there's a small amount of that. And I think back to the day I told her about the diagnosis, and she did what Mia does brilliantly, which is ask and seek clarification around the answers that will help her make some sense of it in a very logical, practical perspective. And then she goes off to her room and she sings and is in her creative heart for the entire night. And I'm grateful she has creativity in her life, and that she has music, and that she has theatre, and that is an outlet for her to express. The way I might like to express and have a conversation with her is to sit down and have a really big, meaningful dad and daughter heart to heart. And that's not how we roll. So what I have endeavoured to do is to, throughout, I made a deal with her that she would always be the first to know whenever there was any news about changing diagnosis, getting into remission, news about the transplant. She would be the first to know. The first conversation we had would always be with her. And we've stuck by that. And I hope that what I have done is always been as open and as honest as I can be, not necessarily expecting there to be anything back. What I hear from those that are close around her from a friendship group is that it resonates and it lands, and she gets a lot more than she lets on. And I think she sees the wisdom, the learning, the insight that I found. I think she sees it. I don't know what she will do with it in her life. I don't know whether she will choose to use some of it. Although saying that, it was interesting when she made her choices about going off to university, which was, she was predicted high grades and to go off and study psychology at Birmingham, which was a demanding course. She chose to go to a beautiful university in Bath that does psychology, lower grades. And when challenged by her school system to say, why aren't you just going for this? You're an A-star student. She's like, I don't want the pressure. I don't want to live in a world that puts enormous pressure and stress on me to perform and to achieve and to be bigger and better. And I want to do it in my way. And I'm incredibly proud of her for making that decision in a system that wanted to push her to conform to what is the norm, which is, you're bright and therefore why don't you work at your very edge? And like anything, when we're at our very edge in life, there's a high chance of us falling off or toppling or losing our balance. And she doesn't want to do that. And I think she understands that. She understands that I have held a lot of stress in my life without an outlet for it. And I think she associates that some of that is down to my becoming unwell, and that she's not going to walk that path. So I don't know, Sam, if if over the years we'll sit down and never have big heart-to-heart conversations. All I get up and do each day is hope that she will find some insight and some understanding. And at least that way, if she spots it and she sees it, she can choose whether to absorb it into her own life or not.
I think that's really beautiful, that what she's decided to do, especially in the context of what you said at the beginning of this chat about your own childhood and your own upbringing in a culture where ascent was the only target, always eyes on the horizon, always. And, I don't think that's rare at all. Like I said, I don't think that's exclusive to your family. It's unfortunately, that's the world we all live in. So it's beautiful that your daughter is not. And that must be, I mean, you must feel touched by it. You obviously are. But also, do you agree with her? Do you think that the stress that you carried as a result of that mindset has contributed to your illness? Is that
yeah, entirely?
You believe that?
Entirely, I do believe that. Yeah,
But you think
that.
Throughout your life, it's almost like, how can I put it, like an addiction to success and achievement and the thrills and the buzz that brings has just filled you with a toxic sort of stress.
Yeah, I do, and I think I have one particular trait which I've already alluded to, which is I grew up in a household that felt it felt full of love, and at the same time it felt like there was something that was unspoken in my childhood. There was my mum and dad's relationship never felt especially loving or close or tactile or supportive. And I saw that when my mum was sad, life in our household felt very tense. So I think I made some choice very early on in my life to be the one who might bring some joy to my mum. I don't know if I chose to sing and act and perform more for her than for me. I'm not entirely sure about that, but I think I brought that into our household to uplift our household and to bring joy into our household. So I kind of got on this really early path of serving others and being the one who could bring joy to others, do things that make other people's lives much better. And that's a great quality to have, only if it is balanced with, do I also seek out bringing joy and fulfillment and life force to myself? And I didn't ever focus on that, which means what comes with that is I don't ask for what I need. I don't ask for what I want. I have struggled to speak up when things were difficult. I was in a very difficult marriage with Mia's mum. Power was very lopsided, and I made a choice to not speak up because it was too difficult, because I didn't like confrontation, because I don't like rocking the boat, because I don't want anyone to be upset, because I didn't want to lose a relationship with my daughter if anything went wrong. So I basically zipped it for best part of 8 or 9 years. And I believe, and again, this is just my truth, it's not the truth, but I believe that as a result of continually burying that which needed to be spoken, but I just didn't have the courage to speak it, by constantly burying it and repressing it and pushing it down into my rucksack, it gave me this kind of really heavy load to carry. And I believe that I buckled, my body buckled, my mind buckled, my heart buckled. And I think if we don't listen to the universe, when soul taps us on the shoulder, if we choose not to listen, if we choose not to be curious and turn to face towards it and go, okay, so I keep getting these taps, what are they for? If we choose not to do that and we just go back on our same old path, then the universe goes, fuck you. If you don't listen, I tap a bit harder. If this isn't big enough, well, then I'll create something bigger for you, and maybe that will grab your attention. I think that's what happened. I think I buried it over 49 years, and this got my attention. And this is going to be this is my life's work. In that I'm not suddenly going, I ask for everything that I need. I don't do that at all. I have to give effort. I have to be really discerning about actually what do I need here? How much does this suit me? I have to be really careful of my energy. I have to be really careful of my immunity, because my immunity is shot after my transplant. So there are lots of situations that I find myself in where I have to go, actually, do you know what? I'm out of here. I can't stay in this environment. I need to be masked up in this environment. It's too late. I don't have any more energy. I'm done. I'm already in reserves. I'm going to go. I need to go now. You can stay, but I'm going to go. Having to do that, and I mean, it sounds crazy when I talk about it, because you'd go, that's a simple thing in life. I hadn't ever done it in life.
Boundaries were not something that
boundaries. I hadn't acknowledged that I had needs. I hadn't acknowledged that what might that be like if I ask for them. What is it like if we go, well, actually, it's possible to meet your needs and my needs, but it requires probably some conversation. Well, I didn't do that. I'd go, what do you want? And I'll give you whatever you want at whatever cost. And that was encouraged in my family. That was encouraged as a good citizen. Good citizens go out there and serve the world. And actually, we have to learn to serve ourselves first before we can actually serve others. And that's, I don't think that's what most of us are taught to do. But I think Mia is starting to work some of that out, and I'm incredibly proud of her for making that decision. And I believe I'm the parent, I hope I am, that she knows she can always turn to, and she'll always get a really honest answer. And I will always, regardless, unconditionally support what she chooses. And I went to visit Bath Spa Uni with her, and it's the most brilliant place for what I guess is what we're talking about, which is creating some balance. So pushing them to do their academic work, and at the same time saying, play and have fun and find joy. You can have both. In this environment, we create both. We find ways that you, students, can be creative in a beautiful environment, a rich, natural landscape. It's like, I'm like sitting there going, where do I sign up? Because why did I go to somewhere like this? I didn't know this existed. But is that a better environment for her than, it's 8,000 people there, than 35,000 people at Birmingham University? I know which place is best for her. And she doesn't need me to kind of hold the flag on that one, because she's made the decision herself.
What would you like? What's the key lesson or the key practical thing that you'd like someone reading this book to take away with them about the way they approach their life?
Find ways in which we encourage ourselves to turn towards the pain and the difficulty that we face. And we are all facing it. We are all facing it in some way or another. Find ways to face towards it. And that means we need a community around us. It means we need to find our kin. We need to find our people who will hold us in the most difficult, darkest, bleakest of times, and trusting that when we do that, there is There is wisdom to be gained. There is intelligence to be gained. There is insight. There is creativity to be unleashed. It's there in abundance, but it's that incredibly brave, tender, gentle, slow steps to face towards what is dark, rather than just facing to it's kind of just purely running for more light. I think it's the hardest thing, and I wonder why our systems don't teach our children to be with difficulty and pain and despair.
How's your health right now, Richard? What's the sort of short term for you?
Mixed. Well, I'm still in remission, which is great. I stopped some treatment a few months ago because it just didn't agree with me. We've made an enormous life move from London down to Wiltshire, so we're living in basically the middle of a field, which was the best thing we could have done. It means I get access to a brilliant new cancer centre at Bath, so they will be taking on my care. In many ways, I'm feeling better more of the time than I have done in the last 3 years. So I got one more lot of treatment to wrap up in London in a couple of months, and then I will be in a 3-monthly rhythm down here at Bath. And then it's really, much of it is with me to look after my body in the best way that I can, and continue the healing journey, stay in remission for as long as I can.
You mentioned your transplant a couple of times. What was that? Yeah. When did you have that?
So I had that. So with many blood cancers, you will have a stem cell transplant. There was no donor for my stem cell transplant. There was no perfect match. They look at siblings first, and neither of my siblings were a perfect match. And there was no one on the donor database that was a perfect match. So that meant that they take out my own cells, spin them in some fabby, amazing centrifugal machine that cleans them and supposedly cleans the smallest trace amount of mantle cell out of my stem cells, and then they get put back into my body. So that meant that was 30 days, around 30 days in an isolated hospital room, no visitors. That was brutal. I mean, it's like annihilate your body with yet more chemotherapy. My hair was just starting to grow back. And they give you 7 days of chemotherapy. My hair fell out again. And then you have the cells put back in you. And, you know, it's an incredibly dangerous medical procedure. A few people in our cancer charity group, we've lost in the last couple of years, young folks, 30s, families, who have picked up an infection during their stem cell transplant and just didn't make it through. So I guess I did go into it knowing not that there was really an alternative beyond a stem cell transplant. But I probably did go in there having signed the forms, yet more forms to sign my life away. But it's with hindsight that I've gone, fuck, that was dangerous.
Mm.
That was yet again closer to the edge than I would have liked. But I'm hoping that gives me more years in remission.
Well, I'm delighted you're here. I'm delighted that you've written this book and that you've been able to spare the time to talk to me on the podcast today, because it has been really powerful experience listening to you, and it also is reading the book as well, so I recommend it to anyone listening. And I'm very grateful for you being so honest and sharing so much wisdom, and wish you all the very best in the future, Richard.
Thank you, Sam. It's been a pleasure chatting to you. Thanks for listening.
That was Richard Tyler. His excellent book, As A Kite Falls, A Voyage Through Descent, is out now, and you can find a link in the show notes. Thanks for listening as always, and please remember to subscribe to The Reset at samdelaney.substack.com for a full archive of over 100 podcasts, plus essays, Q&As and more. And if you like all of that sort of stuff, why not buy my book too? It's about mental health and how I recovered from boozing and other bad habits. It's called Sort Your Head Out, Mental Health Without All the Bollocks, and there's a link in the show notes for that. Until next time, gang, be lucky and don't let the dickheads get you down.